Hey everyone, I'm Tor Norbye from the Android Studio team.
And I'm Jamal, also from the Android Studio team.
And today we're going to walk through what's new in the Android developers toolspace. I'll be giving a demo a little later on, but first, Jamal is going to cover what we've been working on recently.
Today we will cover three main areas: recent changes in Android Studio, an in-depth demo, and lastly, a quick wrap-up to recap all that you heard today. All right, on to recent changes. First off, Android Studio Arctic Fox is currently in the stable release channel. At Google I/O earlier this year, we spoke quite a bit about all the features in Arctic Fox. In case you forgot, this major release has three major focus areas. First off, design. This was the first stable release that included tool support for Jetpack Compose, and a host of design tools and inspectors to make it easier for you to create and preview UI. Secondly, Arctic Fox included a sizable amount of features focused on Android devices, from a heart rate sensor on Wear OS to an updated Android TV emulator that supports Google TV. Lastly, but not least, there was a ton of effort on improving developer productivity with under-the-hood improvements and even tools for Work Manager. Now, let's take a look at Bumblebee, which you can download today in the beta release channel. In this release, you will find our initial support of Material Review and more refinement in our Jetpack Compose tools. Next, you spent more time on creating features that make you more productive. And lastly, with the Bumblebee release, you can get started on scaling your app for large screens with Android 12L. To see some of these features in action, now Tor will walk you through what's new in Android Studio.
We're about to stabilize the Bumblebee release, and our next release is codenamed Chipmunk, and that's what I'll be showing you here today. So the first thing we'll do is upgrade this project to Chipmunk. And we have the AGP Upgrade Assistant to help with that. AGP is short for the Android Gradle plugin. So we will just begin the upgrade and show usages. And this is going to show us what it's about to change in the project. So I can just accept the suggestions and run the import. And now my project should be upgraded to use the latest version of AGP. And next, we will build the project. And once we do that, we can open up the build analyzer and look at some suggestions. And one of them is to look at the build configuration time. So if we click on optimize this and say try configuration cache in a build, Studio will run through your build with configuration caching on, checks whether your build is compatible with configuration caching. And in this case, it is. So we can say enable configuration caching, and now builds will be faster. So it basically sets this environment variable right here. One thing we plan to add to the build analyzer soon is also checking whether the jetifier is necessary. For now, you can just try turning it off yourself, and if the build works, that's going to make for a faster build. Another build-related feature is support for non-transitive R classes. So for that, I'm going to switch to a larger project. This is the K9 Mail app. And what I can do here is go to the refactoring menu and choose Migrate to Non-Transitive R classes. This is going to analyze the whole project, find all the source files that are referencing resources, and it will rewrite them to all be project local and turn on a setting in the build system, which is going to make builds be able to skip a bunch of resource merging. So this helps with performance as well, and definitely recommend switching to this if you have a project with lots of modules and resources. Now, the last thing I'll say about build speed is for lint. A top request from our users has been making lint faster on your CI servers. And so in Bumblebee Canary 13 and later, we now support incremental lint tasks and caching, even remote caching. So let me show you what that means. So here's our K9 project. It's about 30 modules with around 100,000 lines of code distributed across around 1,100 source files. And so here, because we have caching on and because I haven't made any changes to the project, if I clean the project, we can see that there are no lint reports here. If I run lint again with caching on, it's going to pull in those reports in just a matter of a few seconds. Now, obviously, if I make a change to a file, so let's go do that. So here we will change this path such that it's an SD card path. This is a new lint check. This is a new lint incident. So now if I run clean and lint again, so we're simulating a CI build here. Now you can see that again, it's pulling in a lot of cached results. It's only analyzing this one module that changed. And so compared to the 3.5 minutes this would take with older versions of lint, now we get an updated lint report in 17 seconds for this project that we can look at. So while we're on the topic of performance, let's go take a look at our profilers. One of the features we're putting the final touches on now is support for helping you track down jank, which in Android refers to a UI that is not keeping up with the frame rate. So here's a trace that I've already recorded, and we can switch to the frames view. And with Android 11 and 12, we can now capture the frame lifecycle. So these are the frames in the capture, and I'm going to sort them by the duration of the time spent in the application. So it looks like frame 1748 was pretty slow. And so when I select it, you can see the frame lifecycle on the left. It's color-coded, so the purple bar here is in the application, then the same purple bar over where it's waiting for the GPU, and composition. And in fact, if we zoom out a little bit, we can also see when it's spending time on the display. And as you can see, the previous frame was on the display for quite a while, so that's our jank. So now, of course, the next step is to look at the application and render threads. We can swipe out a selection here. And now we can go and look to see what it is the application was doing to figure out what the source is of the jank. And I think in this recording, we were trying to load a bunch of textures at the same time, which is what caused the jank. Okay, let's switch gears from performance to our graphical editors. So this is a camera app where the viewfinder is right here, and we have some labels of the picture below it. And what we want is to have the UI rotate in place as the camera moves between landscape and portrait. And we've made that very simple with motion layout. So we have two states, the normal state for portrait and then the landscape orientation. And you can see we're just rotating the controls. And if we take a look at the XML for this, all we have to do is set these constraint rotate attributes in the motion layout, and then in the manifest, lock to the portrait orientation. So let's see what that looks like. So we'll just play the transition here, and you can see that we are animating and rotating both the icon up here and the label. So let's take a look at this on a real device. So as you can see, we've embedded the emulator into Studio. It starts from snapshots in just a few seconds. We spent the year stabilizing and tuning it, and as of Bumblebee, this is now the default. So notice how when the camera is active, Studio knows that and gives us a hint about how to navigate the virtual scene. So I can now just hold the Shift key and move the camera around to the virtual scene that the emulator is presenting to the camera. The embedded emulator also has access to the full extended controls for the emulator now. So we can, for example, set a route for the navigation, or we can access virtual sensors. So for example, we can change the device pose, which is exactly what we want to do here to test our rotation. So if I start rotating the device sideways, you can see that the UI here is updating to rotate with the sensors. This is still kind of fiddly, so let's try running it on a real device. So another new feature is our device manager. We've removed our AVD modal dialog, and so we've integrated devices here. You can see our virtual devices for the emulator, as well as physical devices that I've attached through Wi-Fi pairing. So let's run this app on a real device. So as you can see here, when I rotate the phone, it smoothly animates between the rotation states. And all I had to do was set a couple of attributes in the motion layout. We're also exploring a feature to make it easier to test this within the design surface without running on a real device. We've already seen how to play the animation in the design surface like this. Well, I can also go ahead and just actually rotate the screen in place in the design surface like this. So we can actually test the animation right here while editing it. So let's take a look at a different layout. So here we have a welcome screen where we are animating in a welcome message to the center. So we start off screen and then we animate in. And the top priorities for Android 12L is handling large screens and different form factors. And one of the concepts we're adding is device classes. And so you see that we now have the various reference devices listed in the device picker. So let's switch to a tablet mode. So you can see that here we actually start out with the welcome message, not in fact off screen. So this animation is pretty broken for large screens. Now, I found out by actually looking at the various different screen sizes. We don't really want to force you to do that. So we have this new feature that we're working on called, tentatively, visual linting. So if I open up the problems view here, you can see that we're actually saying that we have a button which is partially hidden in layout. And so we're basically looking at different preview configurations and seeing if a view is on screen in one, it better be on screen in another as well. So let's open up the layout validation view. And so here we can see this layout across all the screen sizes. And again, if I open up the problems view, we are now showing you the inconsistency right here between the two layouts. And this is not just about checking specifically for things being out of bounds. Here I'm looking at a more realistic app. This is a task tracker. And if I bring up the issues panel here, you can see that it's listing a number of issues that it has found. So again, let's open up the validation view and let's look at the messages here. So for example, it tells us that we have this view inconsistency that we've already seen. It also knows that it only wants to see bottom bars in narrow layouts. And here's an issue it's found where in really wide layouts, you have text lines that are longer than 120 characters, which is not great for usability. So the key thing here is that I didn't have to go and audit all these configurations on my own. Studio is checking these things in the background, and we plan to expand the set of things that we're checking beyond screen size issues. For example, we could look to see if you have unexpected wrapping in certain locales and so on. Last but not least, let's talk about Compose. So we shipped full support for Compose in Arctic Fox, but in Bumblebee, we've added several new features. So first, there's interactive preview. So if I go and click on this icon here, the touch icon next to one of the previews, we start interactive mode. And this starts usually in under 2 seconds. And the key thing is now I can basically test touch handling in my app. So we're sort of running the app in the design surface, and I can, for example, click to open up the shopping cart. I can click to open up the menu and so on. So it lets me do some very lightweight testing of the app, and it's very quick to start and exit. And a very related feature to this is the support for animation inspection. So again, if I click on the animation inspection icon next to the surface, I now get this view of all the animation curves in my animation. I can scrub through the different animations, or I can play them on a loop if I so choose. And so this is a pretty handy way to go through and look to see how your animations are put together in case you want to adjust some of the curves. By the way, in Canary Builds, we also have these little icons next to the preview annotations, the configuration picker, which makes it super easy to go and change and configure the various previews for your composables. Now we know that a really important aspect of Compose is being able to iterate on the UI, changing code and seeing the effects immediately. And we know that build speed is a pretty big hindrance today. So we're working on a couple of features to help with that. The first one is live editing of literals, so meaning strings, numbers, and booleans. So let's take a look at this sample app. This is the Rally financial app. And if I jump to the alert dialog here, I can go ahead and change the text. So, hello there. Notice how as I'm typing, the preview is keeping up pretty much on the fly. And so this works for strings. It also works for numbers. So I can, for example, change the padding to something, much bigger if I want, which I don't. And note that this isn't just for the preview. So now I'm running the app in the emulator, and this would work on a physical device as well. And so I can go ahead and change. And so I can go ahead and change the text, just like before. And so I can change the text just like before. I can also change numbers, and I can also change Boolean. So for example, we can switch soft wrap to false, which clearly is wrong for this UI, so we'll change it back. So far, what I've shown you here are features shipping in Arctic Fox or Bumblebee or in development for Chipmunk. Now I'm going to give you a sneak peek on a couple of features we're working on for releases after that. The first one is live editing, and it's a generalization of the feature I just showed you, live editing of literals, where we let you edit more general scenarios than just constants and strings. So take a look. So here in the preview, for example, I can go in and add a checkbox. And within a couple of seconds, I should see that checkbox show up in the UI. And then I can, for example, add a loop around it. And now we're going to put in 4 checkboxes into the UI, and so on. And again, this is not limited to the preview. We know that for Compose development, having the embedded emulator side by side as you're testing your app logic is super useful, and we're making live editing work with that as well. So this is another app. Here we are playing with Blur in Android 12. By the way, I just want to show you quickly, we support Blur in the layout preview as well in our rendering implementation for the design time preview. Anyway, so here is our running Compose app, and I can now go in here and not just change strings as before, but I can, for example, comment out parts of the UI. I can reorder it, and this is basically equivalent to me typing in new things. I can change parameters, and so on. And you can see it basically, this implementation works within milliseconds of the edits. So it's a very promising feature, but we learned the hard way with Instant Run that this has to be rock solid before we ship it. So we're going to take our time and make sure that this is really right before we include it in Studio. But it's pretty exciting. The next feature is basically the polar opposite of what I just showed you, and that's light mode. So with live editing, we are on the fly. As you're typing, we're doing lots of computations to show you the UI as fast as we can. And with visual linting, we're running analysis in the background to find potential problems in different screen sizes and so on. Light mode basically lets you say to the IDE, hey, I want you to use fewer resources as I'm using the IDE. So let's take a look. So here, this is not in light mode. And as I'm typing, you can see that it's keeping up to date. Now, if I enter light mode, and this is built on top of IntelliJ's power save mode, you can see that we now basically do not keep the UI up to date. And in fact, if I were to open up another file, you can see this is an XML file. We don't default to showing the split as we normally do. We just show you the source file. This is another Kotlin file, and in light mode, as you can see, it is not doing all the normal expensive editor validation that it normally does. You still can use go-to-declaration and basic editor features like that, but it's not running on-the-fly validation, which of course uses a lot of resources. And a key thing about this, so if I were to write in something that is nonsensical, normally this would create RUD symbols. It doesn't do that. But the key thing we've done is that if I save the file, well, then we temporarily unblock light mode so that you get the basic validation that you need. But crucially, you are staying in light mode. And so the idea here is that we are tuning all of the features in Studio to do less work when suitable when you are in light mode. So for example, the layout editor is going to be doing cheaper image scaling and anti-aliasing, and so on. And we're disabling editor features just like Power Save Mode does. So again, this is an early exploration area, but it looks pretty promising. So hopefully something will come of it. And there are, of course, many other features I wish I had time to show, such as all the new features that are part of the IntelliJ 2021.2 merge that we have now landed in Chipmunk. There's the resizable emulators for Android 12L and much, much more. But I'm now going to turn you back over to Jamal, and thank you for using Android Studio.
Again, on top of all the tools you saw today that support phone and large screens, we still have a full suite of tools ranging from templates, codeline inspections, and updated emulators and more for all the Android device categories. To recap, the Bumblebee release of Android Studio has a range of features focused on Jetpack Compose, developer productivity, and large screen development. We also gave you a sneak peek at some of the features we are working on for the upcoming Chipmunk release. Download the latest updates to Android Studio today to get started. Thanks for joining Tor and myself. We look forward to all the great app experiences that you will build with Android Studio.